Hello, and thanks for tuning in to Town Meeting TV's coverage of General Election 2024. This program is part of a series of programs that you can find on Town Meeting TV. You can also find this program and many others like it in the Election Forum series at cctv.org/general. You can also find our programs on Town Meeting TV YouTube channel. And if you're there and you want to subscribe, you'll become part of the algorithm and find more programs like this. On tonight's program, we're going to hear from two candidates running for the Secretary of State's, the Vermont Secretary of State's position. And these candidates are Brooke, Paige, and Sarah Copeland Hanzas. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
We have prepared a list of questions that you've seen in advance, and we're going to go through these questions and we'll alternate who starts. The phone lines are open, and if you do want to call, 802-862-3966. You can ask those questions. We will ask you to make sure that you address them to both candidates at once. So let's get started with 1-minute opening statements, and we're going to start with you, Secretary Hanzas.
Thank you so much. It's really great to be here, and thanks to folks who are tuning in from home. I am really proud of the work that we do at the Vermont Secretary of State's office. We have touch points on so many Vermonters. We serve over 80,000 licensees in our Office of Professional Regulation. We have 110,000 businesses that register through our business registry, 12,000 new businesses last year. But of course, the big subject of the year this year is the fact that we are running a general election this year. And so we've been really focused. The theme of that focus is really people and processes. Our office is the central hub, but of course our elections are only well run because of all of the municipal clerks in the towns and cities around Vermont. So we're really proud of the work that we're doing on those people and processes, and I can't wait to dive in a little more on it.
Great, thanks so much. And Brooke, Paige, if you just tell us why you're running, what qualifies you.
We'll just call me Brooke from now on.
Okay, great, thank you.
Very good. I've looked at Secretary of State's office for a number of years now, going back to probably 2018, and have run several times. There's a lot of troubles within the Secretary of State's office, not just in elections, but also in OPR, the Office of Professional Regulation, and archives, and the other things that go on. But most importantly, at least for this year, is elections, and the fact that our elections have gone far astray from what our Constitution calls for the elections to be. And so we'll talk about that a little more as we go on. The Constitution calls for a single day election conducted by the officials in each town. The legacy of the constable, which is the Board of Civil Authority, which includes the town or city clerk, the I'm sorry.
We'll get into this stuff.
Okay, and the justices of the peace, and also the boards of civil authority, the select boards.
Great, thanks so much. So we're going to go back. I'm going to start with this first question. We do have a question from the public. I'm going to wrap it into the election security question.
Okay.
But we're going to start with what your top priorities for the Secretary of State's office will be, and if you could limit that to 90 seconds.
Okay. As I always mentioned. Already mentioned, I have serious concerns about the propriety and integrity of the election process. Most importantly, that it should comport with the state constitution. Act 60 of 2021 deviates substantially. This is the modifications to the election law that gave us a universal vote by mail, gives us, for the most part, unlimited vote harvesting, inequitable distribution of the ballot boxes throughout the state, and other things that just shouldn't be happening. Our elections should be a one-day process conducted in the local towns with those results handled as the Constitution calls for, where the local officials transmit those directly to the General Assembly. to be tabulated and then announced on return day when the canvassing board meets in early January. If they want if they want these things to be otherwise, the Constitution should have been amended first to accommodate the laws that it sought to change. It's important to mention that the Secretary of State's office is not, in any real sense, a constitutional office. It's mentioned in the Constitution, but only as to how it's to be elected, the day that it's to be elected. And all of the rest of the authority comes from statutory regulations.
Great, thanks. So your priority, sounds like, is elections. And to the Secretary Hanzas, your top priorities for the Secretary of State's office.
Thanks for the question. You know, I've had a really busy first 2 years in office. We have been working to stand up a civics program in which we are working with teachers from around the state to curate civics materials that they can use in their classrooms. I'm really proud of the work that we're doing there. We are also conducting Vermont's first ever Civic Health Index, which will give us the ability to sort of set a roadmap. Where do we see Vermonters who are less likely to be civically engaged, and how can we engage with them? The civics program is also what has brought us Vermont's first ever universal voter guide. And so if you go to mvp.vermont.gov, or if you look in your ballot packet, you will see the slip of paper that describes how to find your universal voter guide so that you can use the days and weeks that you have your ballot in front of you to reach out to those candidates, to follow them on social media, to find out what they stand for, and find the candidate whose values most closely match your own. I'm also really proud of the investment that we're doing in IT systems. We had 4 aging IT systems when I came into the office. We are in the build process on all of those right now, and we will continue that work as we go forward so that Vermonters can expect the same high level of service and transparency into their campaign finance and their lobbying that they've always been able to expect. And when we get a chance maybe later in the show, I'd also like to talk a little bit about the Safe at Home program. That's a program that's near and dear to my heart. We are investing in an IT system in order to make that work better for Vermonters.
Great, thanks so much. You mentioned we're on to election security. You mentioned Act 60. You didn't get a chance to really talk about that. Election security is one of the roles of the Secretary of State's office is to oversee election security. What will you do as Secretary of State to establish trust in local democracy and maintain free and fair elections? And I'm going to append also, we have this question from Phil Dysing from Essex, Vermont. What are you doing, or what would you do as Secretary of State to ally concerns about ballots going to people who have moved and the ballots being cast by the wrong people? We have a transient society. So as referred to, some changes have been made in how we approach elections. And we're going to start with you on this. And if you'd like to tell us election security, how are we approaching that?
Yes, the first resource I'd like to point out to folks is the resource that we have put up on our YouTube page. So if you go to YouTube and you search Vermont Election Security, you'll find a great video. It's about 8 or 10 minutes long with a number of town and city clerks talking about all of the ways we ensure our elections are secure, all of the steps in the process. And, you know, it is, election security is really a race without a finish line, right? There are always new challenges, there are always new concerns. But I want to come back to what I said at my opening statement, which is it is about people and processes. We have 247 duly elected and sworn town and city clerks for a population about the size of the city of Boston. These men and women work hard every day in their communities to ensure that our elections are well run and that the procedures are followed. And they are doing a tremendous job at that. And so in the high water mark in 2020, when we had the greatest voter turnout that we've had in decades, we saw 7 reports from those city and town clerks about irregularities. We investigated them all, and we found that 6 out of the 7 of them were simply human error. Someone checked off the wrong checkbox on the voter checklist. The 7th was someone who was intentionally trying to trick the system and see if he could get away with it, and he was caught. So I feel very confident in the people and in the processes of our elections.
Great, thanks so much. Brooke, Paige?
Yes.
Oh, the question on election security to you.
That's okay. Oh my gosh, so much to unpack. First, I can't help but mention that the 7 complaints that Madam Secretary has talked about were really from the 2020 election, not from the 2022. And so I think in 2020, a mere 7 might have been have something to do with the fact that people were under the concerns of COVID. And so I think a lot of other things were kind of being distracted from. She mentioned the little videotape thing, and I think if you watch it, you'll find there's a point at which the secretary mentions about a person that wrote in, I think, and asked about, oh, what happens if my vote, my ballot gets lost or somebody else votes it? And her comment about that was, well, it's just one vote. And I was taken back by that. I thought it was every vote was important. And if that's your vote, then you're in trouble. Universal vote by mail in Vermont is like elections gone wild. In other states where they have universal vote by mail, they always have voter ID and or signature verification and or up-to-date voter checklist. And here in Vermont, we have none of those, and that's a real concern.
Great, thank you.
Can
Would
I
you
have
like
a
to
rebuttal on
respond?
that?
Yeah, would you like
Thank
to
you.
respond? Yep.
I would appreciate it. Despite the pejorative of my little videotape, it actually is a fair explanation of how our elections work and how the many men and women who work in elections guarantee that our elections are secure. There is an affidavit that someone would have to fill out if they wanted to vote a ballot in person and the clerk had evidence that they may have already voted. That affidavit simply says that you have not, I swear that I have not voted my ballot, and that if I'm committing perjury by signing this and I actually am found to have voted that ballot, it's 15 years in prison and not more than $10,000 or both. And it's very clear on the form. I think it's very clear to Vermonters that voting twice is election fraud, and that these things get investigated and we take care of them.
Thanks so much.
May I?
30 seconds.
Okay. It's interesting that the secretary points out the penalties for voting twice. I noticed she doesn't talk about any penalties for voting for someone else, and those are somewhat different. The penalties she refers to are federal penalties, not state penalties. Mm-hmm. Most of the state penalties are very, very minuscule compared to the what could be the result of voting improperly.
Yeah. So we're going to move on to turnout now. Thank you both. I think we can be concerned about voter fraud, but we have to have people at the polls. And this year, turnout for the primary election was historically low. What can the Secretary of State's office do? What would you do as Secretary of State to support improved voter turnout in future elections? And we'll start. I'm so sorry, Brooke. Paige, thank you so much. Thanks for keeping me on it.
I think the most important thing we need to do is make people have, or allow people to have confidence in the voting process, and not to be fearful of voting, and have confidence that mischievous things are not going on, that the papering the countryside with ballots is probably not the proper thing to do. And so, as I've said before, I really want to return to constitutional values. And I don't want people to be fearful about either voting or counting the votes. Secretary of State has sent out a couple pieces, safe handling of ballots. And it goes into one person should lock themselves in a room when they're opening the ballots. And I mean, this has been sent out for her office. And beyond that, there's also a discussion about, or not a discussion, they're now distributing Narcan out to to all of the town clerks. And this is kind of, interesting. Are they expecting to have to tend to or treat a lot of folks who show up at the polling place that are on drugs and having an episodic event? Like I say, it all tends to not lend to a feeling of esprit de corps in our election process, and that's very troubling.
So again, this is on voter turnout and what the Secretary of State's office can do to support improved voter turnout in future elections.
Super. I think I can do my rebuttal and my answer to voter turnout in the same 90 seconds. Mr. Paige references the early version of the safe mail handling procedures that was emailed out. It was then amended, of course, to make sure that folks understand that whenever we're opening election material, we're doing it with two people, one Democrat, one Republican, so that it is all in the up and up and it is fair. I think it's also really unfortunate and I fear ignorant that my opponent doesn't seem to understand that there are many places around this country where elections offices and in particular mail-in ballot facilities are being targeted with fentanyl-laced powder in envelopes. And so distributing Narcan, while I would love to be compassionate and kind to anyone who might be experiencing an overdose, is really intended to be a safeguard for our election workers, a little piece of comfort so that if they get a powder-laced envelope, they don't freak out. Voter turnout. So primaries are essentially a party function, and as such, it really relies on candidates activating people in their party to want to come out and vote. And I think what we saw this year was that, with the exception of a few House or Senate primary races that people were really excited about, there weren't as many contested races, and so that's why turnout was low. Phil Scott has said in the past that he thinks we should do universal vote by mail for all elections. So I am more than happy to begin doing some work around that and see if we can give everyone a ballot so that it's easier to vote in August.
Great, thanks so much. We're going to move on to remote public meetings. So this year, the legislature passed a bill that requires local public bodies to provide online or in-person meeting participation options upon request and post recordings of these meetings. That's a very quick summary. How would you support the rollout of this law as Secretary of State, and what needs to be done to bring municipalities into compliance with this law? And we're going to start with you, Secretary.
Thank you so much. I'm really proud of the work that my office did in helping the legislature craft this open meeting law. Open government, transparency, access to what your government is doing on your behalf is critical in a democracy. And I don't think there's really any other entity in state government other than the Secretary of State's office that is solely focused on and tasked with supporting that government transparency. The wonderful thing about this open meeting law is that it was an opportunity for the legislature to say, what did we learn during COVID? What did we learn about doing fully remote meetings and about the access that gives to people? And how do we take the best of what we learn and fold it in with what we know about people needing to be able to have access? And so for some people, being able to watch their select board meeting by Zoom is a wonderful access point and essential to their ability to keep up with what's going on. For other people who maybe don't have a computer or internet or choose not to want to engage electronically, there needed to be a physical location for people to come and watch what their government is doing on their behalf. And so what do we need to do to fully implement this law? Our office is at work doing the training materials that select boards and school boards will need in order to be able to comply with that law. And I think ultimately what it's going to require is it's going to require funding for communities to invest in the technology that they need. It's going to require technical support, and we stand at the ready to help with that going forward.
Great, thanks so much. Brooke, Paige, this question of remote public meetings.
I think that the most important thing in all aspects of government is that we have openness, transparency, and accessibility, and so that while doing meetings by Zoom or whatever, are certainly part of that. I think that the whole Zoom technology thing really is still struggling to get up to speed. And the most important part of all of this is for people to engage in person and attend their town meetings, their boards of civil authority meetings, their select board or city council meetings, to be there in person to see a democracy in action.
Great. That's it?
That,
Great, super. So we'll move on to misinformation and AI. Two big topics rolled into one here. How should the Secretary of State's office combat misinformation and disinformation in Vermont? What should the office's role be in addressing election interference powered by artificial intelligence? Which we will start with you, Brooke Paige.
okay. The Secretary of State's office has lots of things that it's responsible for. But I think that dealing too greatly with misinformation and AI is not one of those things. These things are more appropriate for the media and for the political parties to deal with. The problem with the Secretary of State's office combating misinformation and disinformation is that the Secretary of State is a partisan position. It's an elected position. And so no matter how bipartisan or nonpartisan it is, it's always going to be tainted with the political aspect of the party and the fact that the Secretary of State is elected. In other states, Secretary of State, Treasurer, Auditor of Accounts, quite often are not elected, but rather appointed by the governor or by the legislature with the approval of the governor. And I'm not sure that that shouldn't be the case here. You know, if once you take the partisanship out of the office, you give it a lot more credibility.
Do you see any issues with artificial intelligence interference in our elections?
Oh, I'm sure there is. But the problem is I don't think the Secretary of State's office is the one to be involved in that.
Right.
Certainly the parties, as I said, and possibly Attorney General's office would be the proper parties to deal with that.
Thanks so much. And Secretary, to you about how this office can combat misinformation and disinformation. And I guess I would ask you what your experience has been with the interference of artificial intelligence.
So it is a really great question, and it's one that we talk about regularly with the Democratic and Republican Secretaries of State through the National Association that we all are a part of. So while my opponent might want to cast doubt on the accuracy of our elections and throw around misinformation, I happen to believe it's really important that we be a source of truth. And truth is not partisan. Truth is what it is, and we are sharing the facts with folks, making sure, in fact, we created a resource page on our website so that Vermonters can go and look at information on how to evaluate whether something is a trusted resource, as well as tips and tricks on how to identify something that may be misinformation or maybe AI-generated content. During the presidential primary in New Hampshire, there was a phone call, a robocall that came out. There was an AI-generated voice of Joe Biden telling people, don't bother voting now, save your vote for November. Complete fabrication by AI trying to dissuade people from coming out to the polls. I think that's a threat to our democracy. That's why we've created information on our website about AI and about how to spot fakes, and how I think it's essential that we continue that work so that Vermonters can have trust in their elections.
And is it the role of the Secretary of State's office, or is there other offices that would pick up that work? You know, if somebody gets that call, where do they turn to find out, is this real?
They turn to the Secretary of State's office. Yeah. In fact, check out our election resources page.
Yeah.
If I may, statutorily, the Secretary would have a hard time pointing to the resources or authority that office has in order to investigate and litigate misinformation, disinformation, artificial intelligence generated advertising or whatever.
We have only 5 minutes left. I want to give you a chance to speak to the closing questions. So I am going to move to the question of the state archives. The Secretary of State oversees the Vermont State Archives and Records Administration. Where would you focus your efforts as head of the state's preservation of historical records? And this would be sort of along the lines of what keeps you up at night if you're thinking about those archives in the basements or in the servers. And Brooke, Paige, we're going to start with you on this.
Being a historian and also being involved in some litigation with the state, including the Secretary of State's office, I spend a lot of times up at archives, and there's a number of problems there. I remember going to take a look at our town charter in little town of Washington, where I live, one of the original charters in 1777. And when they brought the volume out, it was disbound, and the binding was shot, and it was in very, very poor condition. And they kind of just tenderly leafed through the pages. Other times when I've been researching school merger and all of the laws relating to that, those records were actually kept in the basement of the Redstone building and are infected or infested, however you want to look at it, with mold. And so when I go to look at those records, I've got to take Benadryl, and also slather Benadryl cream on my hands just so I don't become reactive to it when you're dealing. So there's a lot going on. The most important thing I think that the Secretary of State's office could do is to digitalize all of those records. So as the physical documents fade into the sunset, so to speak, or as they attempt to preserve them, there would be less of a need for them to be constantly being handled, and I think that would be a really important thing, to not only for the records to be preserved, but also to make them easily accessible.
Great, thank you. Secretary Hanzas.
So I've heard Mr. Paige talk about mold in the archives before, and so I asked our state archivist, how would I answer this question if he brings this up again? And she had a very good explanation for me. The archives used to exist in the basement of the Redstone building. That was over 20 years ago. There was a leak at that point, but the records were all carefully dried and are now preserved. When we built the Middlesex facility, it was built with state-of-the-art technology and designed to be an archives and a repository to keep climate-controlled all of the documents that we are tasked with preserving. I'm really proud of the work that our team at Vasara does, especially around the work of the Vermont Historic Records Program, which has gone out both during the 2023 flood aftermath and this year in the 2024 flood aftermath, and helped communities that don't have climate-controlled warehouses to store their information, to preserve those documents. Increasingly, the documents that we're taking in are digital. And so we have repositories that are available to folks, and we are digitizing the documents that we have in paper form continuously over the years, so that more and more of that becomes available to Vermonters from the convenience of their computer, although we still do welcome you to come to the archives in Middlesex, make an appointment, come down, do some research, talk with the wonderful men and women who work there.
Great, thanks so much. We're going to move on to closing statements, and if there's something we didn't get to a question on absentee ballots, and we didn't get to a question on all legal resident voting, and so if there was something on there that you wanted to mention, you could add. We'll give you about a minute for your closing comments, and we will start. Secretary Hanzas, with you.
Thank you so much. I'm really proud of the 80 plus people who work at the Secretary of State's office. When you ask them what makes them excited to come to work or what makes them feel very satisfied at the end of the day, they to a person say, I just like being able to answer people's questions. And so when you're looking for an agency that believes in transparency, that believes in public protection, that believes in providing reliable resources, it is the Secretary of State's office. I'm proud of the work that I've done over these first 2 years of my time as Secretary in enhancing all of that that work that they're doing and in making sure that we stand out and stand proud as the agency of state government that answers the phone and will help answer your question.
Okay, thanks so much. Brooke, Paige, your closing comments.
Very good. I hope that the folks will understand that by electing me as Secretary of State, that I will provide them with constitutionally based elections. I have no problems with absentee voting. Most states have absentee voting, and it can be made to comport with the same single-day election process by seeing that those ballots that come in are held and not opened, and then opened at the close of the day on election day. This would allow individuals who find that they've voted in error to come in and cure their ballot by asking that ballot be pulled out. They can't ask for it back, but have it marked as defective or void, and then asked to vote live. I think we're going to see a lot of problems as we come into the election process. Deb Markowitz and Jim Kondos were able to retain much of the election staff, whereas everyone virtually in the election staff today are all new people. I hope that you'll give me your vote for Secretary of State, and I look forward to serving you as the next Secretary of State of Vermont.
Thanks. You had a comment, and you just
I
a
would
quick
like to
rebuttal.
respond to that. Yeah, I think putting out misinformation in your closing remarks is a little bit underhanded. We lost 2 members of our elections team, so we have 2 new members of our elections team, and I'm very proud of the work that they're doing in bringing all of the services that our town and city clerks need in order to run elections.
All right. Thanks so much.
If I may, there were 3 people that left.
No, that's not true.
Chris Winters, J.P. Isabel.
Chris Winters was the Deputy Secretary of State.
So we're going to move on.
Okay.
Thanks so much. And
Very
I think thank you both for attending. I
I'm
really
sure you've
appreciate
met
you
Lauren
both.
Hibbert, our Deputy Secretary of State.
I have.
I appreciate you both attending today, and thank you all for tuning in to Town Meeting TV's ongoing coverage. Again, if you want to see this forum again, or if you want to see other forums like it, you can look at cctv.org/general. Don't forget to cast your ballot in the general election on or before November 5th. Polls will be open until 7 p.m. You should have received a mail. You should have received your ballot at home, and if you have not, please contact your local clerk to find out how you can vote, again, on or before November 5th until 7 p.m. Thank you for watching and sharing Town Meeting TV.